The Great Abandonment. The stellar assembly's grand chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of crystallized space, its walls made from compressed starlight that the Etherians had harvested from dying suns. Representatives from 47 species filled the floating platforms, their forms ranging from the serpentine Vorthak to the crystalline Lumini. At the center, standing on a simple metal platform that seemed primitive compared to the ornate alien structures around them, 3 human ambassadors waited for judgment. Ambassador Chen Wei kept her back straight, despite the weight pressing down on her shoulders. Beside her, Marcus Rodriguez gripped a datapad showing Earth's defense capabilities, though everyone knew those numbers meant nothing here. The third ambassador, elderly Professor Amara Okonkwo, watched the alien faces with the calm of someone who had already accepted their fate. The Primarch of the Assembly, a being of pure energy contained within a geometric shell, pulsed with colors that translated into words through the chamber's systems. The verdict came down like a hammer made of ice. Humanity would be removed from all stellar maps. Their colonies would be erased. Their trade routes would be closed. Their communications would be severed. They would be pushed beyond the terminus line, that invisible border where known space ended and the true void began. The reason was fear. Pure, simple fear. In just 200 years since first contact, humanity had spread to 30 systems. Other species took millennia to achieve what humans did in decades. Where the Vorthak needed perfect conditions to establish colonies, humans thrived in toxic atmospheres and frozen wastelands. Where the Lumini required centuries of negotiation before settling disputes, humans adapted, overcame, and moved forward with terrifying speed. Ambassador Chen finally spoke, her voice carrying through the translator systems. She did not beg or plead. She simply asked how long they had to leave. The answer came swift and cold. 3 months. After that, any human ship found within assembly space would be destroyed without warning. The journey to the terminus line took every ship humanity possessed. Military vessels escorted civilian transports. Mining ships carried families instead of ore. Even decommissioned hulks were pressed back into service, their holds packed with supplies and refugees. 10 billion humans moved through space in a convoy that stretched across light years, watched by alien armadas that ensured none turned back. Captain Sarah Mitchell commanded one of the escort frigates, the UNS Perseverance. Through her viewport, she watched alien dreadnoughts hovering like vultures, their weapons powered and ready. Her crew wanted to fight. Every human in the fleet felt the burning shame of being herded like animals. But Mitchell knew the truth. They were outgunned 1,000 to 1. Fighting now meant extinction. The terminus line was not a place anyone went by choice. Beyond it lay systems that stellar cartographers had marked as worthless. Dead stars, rogue, planets' asteroid fields so dense that navigation was nearly impossible. The assembly races had looked at these regions once and declared them fit only for disposal of waste and exile of criminals. Now, they would be humanity's new home. The first world they found was a frozen rock orbiting a brown dwarf star. The colonists named it Defiance. Its atmosphere was poison, its surface temperature never rose above -60 degrees Celsius, and its nights lasted 40 Earth days. The assembly observers who watched from safe distance expected the humans to die within a year. They recorded their observations and returned to civilized space, satisfied that the human problem had solved itself. But humans did not die. In the frozen caves of Defiance, they built their first settlements. Engineers worked 20-hour shifts to establish geothermal taps. Botanists modified crops to grow in artificial light. Children learned to wear environment suits before they learned to walk. Every death was mourned, every birth celebrated, every small victory shared across the growing colony. Similar scenes played out across a dozen worlds. On Scorched Landing, where the day side reached temperatures that melted lead, humans built cities on the Terminator line and learned to live in eternal twilight. On Void's Edge, a rogue planet with no star at all, they created underground cities powered by fusion reactors built from salvaged ship cores. The children born in these harsh worlds were different from their Earth-born parents. They grew up knowing that the galaxy had rejected them, that they lived in exile because other species feared what humanity might become. This knowledge did not break them. It forged them into something harder. They learned engineering before literature, survival before philosophy, unity before individuality. Dr. Elena Vasquez ran the education programs on Defiance. She watched these children of exile grow and noticed changes that went beyond simple adaptation. They solved problems faster, thought in three-dimensional patterns naturally, and showed intuitive understanding of complex physics. The harsh environment was forcing human evolution to accelerate. Natural selection, compressed into a handful of generations, was creating something new. The first decade in exile tested every limit of human endurance. Food shortages were common. Equipment failures killed hundreds. Diseases mutated in the alien environments, requiring constant medical innovation. But with each crisis overcome, humanity grew stronger. They learned to extract water from minerals that the assembly races considered worthless. They developed alloys from materials that alien science had dismissed as useless. They turned the wastelands of the void into laboratories of survival. Communication between the exile colonies was limited but constant. Each world shared its discoveries, its innovations, its failures and successes. A technique developed on scorched landing to handle extreme heat was adapted on Defiance to create more efficient heating systems. A food production method from Void's Edge revolutionized nutrition across all colonies. Humanity had been scattered, but they remained united by shared struggle and common purpose. By the end of the first decade, the colonies were no longer just surviving. They were growing. Birth rates exceeded death rates. New settlements spread across the hostile worlds. Ships that had barely survived the exodus were repaired, improved, and modified with technologies born from necessity. The exile colonies had become something the Assembly had never anticipated. They had become homes. Commander Zhang Liu stood on the observation deck of Haven Station, a massive structure built in the empty space between the exile worlds. Around him, displays showed the status of each colony. Population numbers climbing. Resource extraction increasing. Ship production beginning. It had taken 10 years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice, but humanity had foothold in the darkness. Zhang allowed himself a rare smile. The Assembly had thrown humanity into hell. But humans had always been good at conquering hell. The children of the void grew up with stories of Earth, of blue skies and green fields, of cities that touched the clouds and oceans that stretched beyond horizons. But these were fairy tales to them. Their reality was steel corridors, recycled air and windows that looked out on hostile worlds or empty space. Yet they did not feel deprived. They felt proud. They were the first generation of void-born humans adapted to life in the darkness, stronger than their ancestors, united by exile. In the secret chambers beneath Defiance's surface, Project Prometheus began. Scientists and engineers worked on technologies that the assembly races had never pursued, because they had never needed them. Stealth systems that made ships invisible to standard sensors, weapons that used the unique properties of dark matter, drives that could navigate the dense asteroid fields that protected the exile worlds. Humanity was not just surviving in the darkness, they were learning to use it. The return of the forgotten 20 years had passed since the exile. In assembly space, humanity had become a cautionary tale told to young species about the dangers of unchecked growth. The Border Patrol stopped watching the terminus line after the 5th year. No signals came from beyond. No ships emerged. The exile was considered complete, the human threat contained forever in the wastelands of space. The Assembly's complacency was their first mistake. Admiral James Thompson stood on the bridge of the Retribution, a ship that should not exist. Built entirely in the void from materials mined from dead worlds, it incorporated 20 years of innovation born from desperate necessity. Its hull absorbed sensor pings rather than reflecting them. Its engines used a form of propulsion that left no energy signature. It was a ghost made real, a shadow given teeth. Around him, 30 similar vessels held position in the asteroid field just beyond the terminus line. Each one was crewed by void-born humans who had never breathed natural air, never felt real sunlight, never known anything but the exile. They had trained their entire lives for this moment. Not for invasion, not for revenge, but for something the assembly would never understand. They had come to prove a point. The first sign of humanity's evolution came through the merchant lanes. Ships traveling near the terminus line reported strange malfunctions. Navigation systems failed. Cargo manifests scrambled. Communications went dead for hours, then returned with no explanation. The assembly investigated but found nothing. Their sensors showed empty space. Their patrols found only asteroids and cosmic dust. They concluded it was natural phenomenon, some quirk of the void regions. The truth was more unsettling. Human ships were passing through assembly space unseen, testing their stealth systems, mapping current defenses, listening to communications. The void-born pilots could navigate asteroid fields that would destroy normal vessels. They could hide in the magnetic shadows of gas giants, slip through solar winds, disappear into dark matter clouds. They had become masters of the very environment meant to kill them. Captain Lisa Park commanded one of these scout ships. Her crew of 12 had all been born after the exile. They knew the assembly only as the enemy who had cast out their parents. But Park enforced strict discipline. They were not here to start a war. They were here to gather intelligence and demonstrate capability. Each successful mission proved that humanity had not just survived, but transcended their imprisonment. Back in the exile worlds, the population had reached 15 billion. The harsh conditions that should have limited growth had instead created a generation of humans who were tougher, smarter, and more unified than any in history. They built cities in impossible places. They created art from scrap metal and poetry from technical manuals. They loved and laughed and lived full lives in conditions that would drive other species mad. The transformation was not just physical or technological. It was psychological. Where Earth humans had been divided by nations, religions, and ideologies, the Void-born knew only one identity: human. Their shared exile had forged them into a single people with a single purpose. They would never again allow themselves to be vulnerable to the whims of other species. Dr. Maya Patel, now elderly but still sharp, had documented the changes in human physiology over the 20 years. Lung capacity had increased to handle thin atmospheres. Bone density had adapted to variable gravity. Neural pathways had evolved to process three-dimensional navigation instinctively. But the most significant change was mental. The Void-born could handle isolation, darkness, and hostile environments without psychological breakdown. They had adapted to conditions that the assembly races considered uninhabitable. The Shadow Fleet, as they called themselves, began more aggressive operations in the 21st year. Assembly military convoys found themselves mysteriously delayed. Supply routes were disrupted by perfectly timed asteroid movements. Defense stations reported sensor ghosts that vanished when investigated. The assembly began to suspect sabotage but could find no evidence. Their technology, advanced as it was, had been designed to detect threats from known space. It was blind to dangers that came from the void. Ambassador Chen Wei, now in her 70s, still served as humanity's unofficial leader. From her office on Haven Station, she coordinated the colonies and directed the Shadow Fleet's operations. She had spent 20 years planning for this moment, when humanity would announce its return, not with violence but with a demonstration that would shake the Assembly's confidence to its core. The demonstration came during the Assembly's centennial gathering, when all 47 species sent their leaders to the Grand Chamber. In the middle of the ceremony, every screen, every hologram, every communication device in the chamber activated simultaneously. Ambassador Chen's face appeared, older but unbowed, addressing the beings who had exiled her people. She spoke calmly, without anger or threat. She explained that humanity had survived. More than survived, they had thrived. They had built cities in the void, raised children in the darkness, created technologies that the Assembly had never imagined possible. And now they had returned. Not to conquer or destroy, but to exist. The exile had failed. Humanity would not be erased. To prove her point, the Shadow Fleet revealed itself. 30 ships materialized around the Assembly's capital station, having been there invisible for days. They did not fire weapons or make threats. They simply existed, proving that humanity could go anywhere, unseen and unstoppable. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished back into the void. The psychological impact was devastating. The Assembly had believed themselves safe, protected by their advanced technology and superior numbers. But humanity had evolved beyond their understanding. The void had not weakened them but transformed them into something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that thrived in darkness, that grew stronger from hardship, that united completely in the face of extinction. Panic spread through assembly space. Some species called for immediate military action, but their strategists pointed out the terrifying reality. If humanity could hide ships in the heart of their capital, they could be anywhere. The void that surrounded assembly space was no longer empty. It was full of humans who had learned to live where no one else could, to hide where no one could find them, to strike from shadows that sensors could not penetrate. The younger generation of void-born humans had different ideas than their parents. Where the older generation wanted recognition and returned to assembly space, the void-born questioned why they should want acceptance from species that had tried to destroy them. They had built something better in the darkness. Their cities were monuments to human ingenuity. Their culture was unified and strong. Why should they seek approval from those who feared them? Lieutenant Commander Alex Chen, daughter of the ambassador, represented this new generation. She had never seen Earth, never breathed natural air, never known anything but the exile. To her, the void was not a prison, but a kingdom. The harsh worlds were not punishment, but proof of human superiority. She commanded a new class of ship, built entirely by void-born engineers that could navigate the densest asteroid fields and survive in the coronas of stars. The assembly tried to negotiate. They sent envoys to the terminus line, offering to lift the exile if humanity agreed to limitations on their expansion. The response came not from Ambassador Chen, but from the Council of the Void, a governing body of young leaders born after the exile. They rejected the offer completely. They did not want to return to assembly space. They wanted recognition as a sovereign power, equal to any in the galaxy with the void as their domain. The realization struck the assembly like a physical blow. They had not exiled humanity. They had created a rival power. By pushing humans into the harshest regions of space, they had forced evolution, innovation, and unity. The void was no longer a wasteland, but a fortress. The exiles were no longer refugees, but a nation. And that nation had capabilities that the comfortable worlds of the assembly could not match. As the 22nd year began, the galaxy faced a new reality. Humanity had not been destroyed by the darkness. They had become its masters. The void that surrounded assembly space was no longer empty, but filled with an invisible empire of humans who could strike anywhere, anytime, without warning. The exile had ended, not because humanity had been forgiven, but because they had made themselves impossible to ignore. The final message from the void-born to the assembly was simple and clear. Humanity had risen from the darkness. They did not seek war, but they would never again accept subjugation. They had been abandoned by the stars, cast into hell, and told to die. Instead, they had built heaven in hell's heart and emerged stronger than those who had cast them out. The galaxy had created its own greatest threat by trying to destroy it, and now humanity stood ready. Not as exiles or refugees, but as masters of the darkness, forever changed, forever united, forever unbreakable.